Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us for the inaugural Bauder Lecture at Howard Community College. Thanks to the generosity of Dr. Lillian Bauder, we are bringing outstanding, thought-provoking writers and thinkers to the college to share their books and their insights with their students, faculty, staff, and community. The Bauder Lecture developed out of the work of Howard County Book Connection, whose members select a book that encourages dialogue and writing throughout the community. From early on, the book, Friday Black, caught the attention of the committee for its satirical exploration of systemic racism in our country. While published in 2018, prior to the horrific deaths of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and many others, this book is the unflinching look that we must take now. This is why we are so pleased to welcome Friday Black author Nana Kwame Adjei-Brenyah with us today. It's been a collaborative effort to make this possible, so thank you to the Book Connection Committee, a partnership between the college and Hoko Palazzo, and to the Howard County Public Library for being its co-promoter. Within HCC, I must thank the offices of Student Life, Student Development, and Public Relations and Marketing, as well as the staff of the HCC Library and the faculty in the English and Humanities areas. For today's Bauder Lecture, we have three parts: the keynote by Mr. AdjeiBrenyah, followed by dialogue with local author Tope Folarin, and a question and answer session. To start us off, I am pleased to introduce Tope Folarin, author of A Particular Kind of Black Man. Mr. Folarin won the 2013 Caine Prize for African Writing, was named a Writer to Watch by the New York Times, and was recognized as one of the promising African writers under 40 by the Hayes Festival's African 39 Initiative. Without further ado, please welcome Mr. Folarin.
Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. It's a pleasure to be here to talk with a great author who's written a tremendous book. Friday Black is a powerhouse collection of stories that offers a wholly relevant and deeply unsettling chronicle of our times. The irony of this collection is that many of the stories are based in a possible version of our future or a skewed version of our present, and yet they illuminate so much about the people we've become and how we got here. I have to admit that I hadn't read this book before I knew I'd be conducting this interview with Nana, though I'd heard about it, of course. And as I was reading, I was so impressed with it, not only because of its sci-fi themes, because I'm definitely a sci-fi fanatic, but also because it's interspersed with trenchant political themes and critique, and most of all, because it is so well crafted. These are the best kinds of stories, relevant to our times, beautifully rendered, and incredibly compelling. As Tommy Orange says in the New York Times Book Review, AdjeiBrenyah is here to signal a warning, or perhaps just to say that this is what it feels like in stories that move and breathe and explode on the page. In Friday Black, the dystopian future AdjeiBrenyah depicts, like all great dystopian fiction, is bleakly futuristic only on its surface. At its center, each story, sharp as a knife, points to right now. Nana Kwame Adjei-Brenyah is the New York Times bestselling author of Friday Black. He's originally from Spring Valley, New York, and he graduated from SUNY Albany and received an MFA from Syracuse University. He was selected by Colson Whitehead as one of the National Book Foundation's 5 under 35 honorees. He's the winner of the Penn Gene Stein Book Award and a finalist for the National Book Critics Circle's John Leonard Award for Best First Book and the Aspen Words Literary Prize. It's my pleasure to introduce Nana to all of you.
Thank you so much for that. I'm humbled. Introductions like that, they always make you feel like, dang, am I like smarter than I think I am? So I really do appreciate that. I appreciate being in this space, and I appreciate it so much. You know, even though I can't be there, I cleaned up my room a little to reflect that. And I'm glad I did, because it gave me the opportunity to maybe like dive into a little history lesson. I found this old world relic. Some of you guys may know this pre-pandemic relic. It's called the Iron, maybe I think it was called. And it had some interesting uses. It was used to, I think, cook food. You could just press up this heated side against like bread or spaghetti or something. It could be used to bludgeon one's enemies. It's pretty dense. And also, if you can believe it, another use of this in the old pre-pandemic world was to use heat energy, kinetic heat energy, to obliterate wrinkles in clothes. And I know that feels really ridiculous, but it was a thing in the old world. So I know, like, we're in a difficult time, but if you know at least one thing that's different is we don't care about irons anymore. And so, unless you still do, and if that's the case, I'm sorry. So yes, it's all jokes aside, it's my pleasure to be here in my room outlooking the Bronx. I wish I was there. And if I imagine really hard, I can hear some of you laughing. And again, thank you to all people involved in this. I feel very grateful to be here. And so today I thought I'd maybe just speak about why I write and why I think asking why of yourselves is an important thing to do. And to get into that, I wanted to read just a little piece of an essay about the kind of stories I write, and then move from there. And this essay was called Why I Write Political Stories. Political Stories. I was in college and Trayvon Martin was murdered. I created an anonymous pamphlet, an artistic response to the atrocity. His killing deserved our outrage. Late one night, I scattered 500 copies of the pamphlet around campus. I went to bed expecting unrest, a revival, a conversation, anything. But when I got up later that day, maybe predictably, nothing happened. That summer, I was at a barbecue in Riverside Park when Trayvon's murderer was acquitted. I remember getting the notification on my phone. I felt exposed, fragile. I had been partying just a minute before. Years later, writing the Finkelstein Five, the story that now opens my first book, Friday Black, I tried to translate the ways in which the justice system is often a cruel joke for Black Americans. I want to express the feeling of always being perceived as a threat by so many, and the completion of that story was the closest I've ever come to a breakthrough. It was the second time I felt that I wanted people to read what I'd written, even if my name wasn't attached. So yeah, I'm interested in the ways we dehumanize each other. I'm interested in our capacity for good, despite the insidious hatred all around us. And all the stories of Friday Black, including the Finkelstein Five, were tough to write. And yet, in the space of difficulty and fear, I found necessity and purpose. So that's that essay, the beginning of that essay anyways. And a question I think an artist is going to be asked at some point or another, and more importantly, a question you should ask yourself, I think, artist or not, is why? Why am I doing what I'm doing? In my case, why am I doing this extremely difficult, emotionally taxing, not necessarily lucrative thing? When I taught a freshman writing course a few years ago at Syracuse, I'd ask my students another version of the same question. I'd say, why are you here? They would blink at me. Then there would be silence. And then I'd say, it's okay. It's okay if you're here because you were forced to, or because your parents, or because of the world. But this question is a question to at least ask yourselves, because it is very, very possible to go through the motions of a young life. In the essay excerpt I read just a second ago, I explained why it is I write political stories. But beneath that, or connected to that, is why I write at all. I write stories because I believe they can save us from ourselves. And so I have this complicated and maybe annoying metaphor for like my why that draws a lot actually on the anime Dragon Ball Z. But if you have not watched that show, hopefully it still makes sense. I think it will still make sense. So yeah, in one of the more epic battles of this show, our hero named Goku, he's an alien, but he's humanoid, so his name is Goku, is battling a monster named Majin Buu. Majin Buu is pink, muscled, wild-looking character. You can imagine any kind of monster you like. For our purposes, the monster is a metaphor, as is Goku. In this metaphor, Goku represents humanity, and Majin Buu represents the true existential crises, challenges we face. Majin Buu is hunger, disease, both physical and mental, the elements and the destructive powers of the environment, lack of resources. Majin Buu, for the purposes of this probably too complicated metaphor, represents those very real things. To fight this very real enemy, Goku, who again represents humanity, is very tired and he's battered and bruised, and he raises his arms to the air and makes a final plea. He says, "People of Earth, lend me your power." And he can like telepathically connect to all humans on the planet. And understanding that he is fighting for all people because Majin Buu is powerful enough to literally blow up the planet, the people raise up their own hands and send energy to Goku. Goku receives this energy and uses it to create a huge ball of destructive energy called the Spirit Bomb. So we have Goku, who represents humanity and all we want to do, our desire to thrive, prosper, love, and grow, and Majin Buu, who is the embodiment of all the natural and true evils of the world. But now we have the Spirit Bomb, a collective effort that can potentially destroy Majin Buu. For me, the Spirit Bomb, this huge ball of destructive energy, of utility energy, represents the tangible advancements we make collectively to improve the physical world around us. The medicines we developed, the houses we build, the technological, agricultural developments that help us thrive, so many of those type of things. And so Goku, our hero, throws this huge ball of power at Majin Buu, the monster. That is to say, humanity works to destroy that which would destroy us. But there's a problem. Goku, our hero, humanity, is tired. He's used so much energy even fighting already and creating the Spirit Bomb in the first place. And so he throws that huge ball of energy and it hangs there in the air, suspended between himself and the monster Majin Buu. Majin Buu is powerful and using an invisible force of its own so that it can redirect a massive ball of collective energy back at our hero, Goku. If that were to happen, Goku would be destroyed. Majin Buu uses fear and worry and all the powers that we might call negative to push the Spirit Bomb back towards Goku. Goku is powerful, but he is tired. He's expended so much energy, as I said, making the Spirit Bomb in the first place. The Spirit Bomb is spectacular. But as Goku strains with his palms forward, using his own power and invisible force to try the Spirit Bomb, which is stuck in an invisible reverse tug of war between him and Majin Buu, he has to call out to the world again. Because the Spirit Bomb, which was created to destroy Majin Buu, the monster, emblematic embodiment of so much that would destroy us, the Spirit Bomb is heading back towards humanity, towards us. So again, people of Earth, Goku screams, please, again, lend me your power. The Spirit Bomb has already been made, so what more does he need? This moment, when the Spirit Bomb has been made and is approaching humanity quickly, for me, that's kind of my why. That's sort of why I write. And so what do I mean by that? I mean, there are many forces that are terrifying this world, none more terrifying than those which man has made. Every time a technological advancement is made and quickly used to distribute death in new, more efficient ways, to me, that's the Spirit Bomb approaching. For example, nuclear power creates a whole new landscape of energy possibilities, but it's also leveraged to potentially world-ending destruction. That is the Spirit Bomb approaching. We develop new and more efficient ways to house people, but build sky rises that often sit empty while humans sit homeless in the cold. That's the Spirit Bomb approaching. We develop a host of medical advancements, but quickly attach new ways to exclude some from what would be their salvation. That is the Spirit Bomb approaching us. So the Spirit Bomb is approaching Goku, who represents humanity, and it will destroy him faster than even Majin Buu, the reason it was created, would have. I think this is the situation humanity so often finds itself. There are many challenges in front of us always. One has defined this last year in so many ways, and is the reason you're listening to me through a screen. Challenges are scary because often lives are at stake. We are terrified, and very often, I know I am. But what happens over and over again is we forget that our ultimate goal is communal growth, to thrive, to prosper together. And we often believe steadfastly in imagined distinctions. We often cut off our own finger and call it Majin Buu, even as we bleed. So when Goku begs a second time for the people of Earth for strength, he is this time asking for the power to guide the spirit bomb towards its intended destination, toward Majin Buu, the monster. This is why I write. It's kind of why I think art matters. We have to be reminded of why. Art gives us the space to think critically and with nuance, to appreciate beauty and marvel at our own ability to create. It's a celebration of life, all life, the light and the macabre. That is, in my mind, the guiding push that stops us from destroying ourselves, as we are so keen on doing, and remembering that we are in a journey together, trying our best to survive against that which scares us. Art, and for me, writing in particular, is a way of reminding the world and myself that all humans are a part of a force bound by inherent humanity, and that we must never forget that vigilant love is necessary to always keep ourselves from being destroyed by that which was meant to save us. Okay, so that was a probably too long metaphor, but I hope it makes sense. I offer it because for you all, I hope that you move through life and are asking the question of why. I hope that maybe this kind of silly example that I use reminds you that you are part of something bigger than yourselves. And that no matter what you do, you owe it to yourself and the collective to move in what feels like purpose to you. And I think that purpose can be anything. I don't think it should be something you do because you think you have to. I also don't think it has to be any one specific thing. It's important to remember you deserve all the good this world has, even if you don't produce a single thing or ever even work in the traditional sense. All I really want you to do is think about what you like, consider why. And I want to make it clear, I did not think of any of this until I already decided writing was something I loved, that stories were something that mattered to me. The question of why was something I applied to what had already become a passion, and asking that question and arriving at an answer that grows and develops as I do deep into that passion further. So maybe all I'm saying, if I might be so bold to give any advice, is take your own interests seriously. Be enamored with what it is you love. Do not diminish what you think is fun or what you think matters. Pleasure, joy, those might be intimately connected to your purpose. So when you think about what it is you love, think about why and trust the answer. Go beyond the just because underneath that, there's something that might not be so easy to put in words, but it might be a place of great power. So yes, thank you guys for listening. And think about why.
It's a fantastic lecture. Thank you so much for that, Nana. It's a pleasure to hear you talk about your work and to hear about your motivations and inspirations. You said something that really, of course, man. You said something that I hadn't really, I don't know why I hadn't thought about this or considered it in depth before you said it, but I'm recognizing now that we're both the sons of African immigrants. If I'm not mistaken, your parents are from Ghana. My parents are from Nigeria. And you took the leap into writing, I'd say quicker than I did. So I don't know how what kind of African parents you had. I sometimes speak about African parents as if they're all one and the same. I know that they're not, but my parents were my parents were obsessed with education. And I had this deep sense of duty to them. I had to kind of do well academically before I could go off and do the kinds of things that I wanted to do, including art, including writing. And you leaped into writing directly after undergrad, if I'm not mistaken. So a two-part question for you. One, where did that courage come from? Or was it required in your content?
It's funny you say it, because I actually, I had a joke that I pulled because I didn't want to be talking too long. And it's like, I used to say when I was on book tour, and it was like, I finally figured out how to get my very Ghanaian very much immigrant parents to co-sign my life as an artist. And then the punchline was all I had to do was get a profile in the New York Times. And so I you know, for me, I kind of finessed it, you know. I was like, they were kind of like, Nana's gonna be a professor. That was in their mind where I went to get the MFA. It wasn't really like I was gonna be a writer. It was like Nana's gonna be a professor. And I think that's the way I made it. Also, my program was free. So I think they were okay with that. But also more seriously, like I think like I don't know. I think the circumstances had gotten pretty rough, and I took a really ridiculous bet on myself. And also, this is also not understanding money, because, you know, obviously writing is not the thing you should do to financially save your family, but that's what I was like trying to do. And so yeah, I had this thing. I had no other skills. I'd work in the mall and in retail for so long. So I got into the MFA program, and that little stipend, which for most people is nothing, I had never gotten like $13,000 in a year or something. So to me, it was like, okay, that's at least somewhere to start. So it made economic sense as well. But I don't know. It was a leap of faith in a lot of ways.
Yeah. No, it's really fascinating to hear you talk, because I hear like sort of deep echoes in my experience as well. But in my case, even in terms of feeling this obligation to, as it were, save the family, it's something that I felt my entire childhood and still feel to this day. And I think it's probably something a lot of children of African immigrants feel. The second part of my question is, what were you reading? What told you? What did you read that said to you, like, this is something I need to do? I need to spend my life doing this.
So I'm from like, you know, like that sort of OG Harry Potter generation. And so which the thing about that is I had come up seeing a book being like the biggest pop culture thing pretty much. And you know, like my parents were also really into education, and reading was cool in my house. I have an older sister, and she kind of set the tone for everybody. And so Harry Potter was so cool, but then so many other books were so cool. There were tons of books that I kind of learned. I didn't have like that weird thing of like not being into reading, which was such a lucky gift. Like honestly, even if I weren't a writer, if you can learn to like reading early on, it just gives you the keys to the world. Excuse me. And so, but yeah, I was into tons of like sci-fi stuff, like random sci-fi, and my parents were the kind of parents that bring you to the library when it opens and come back when it closes. So I will go to like serial, like Animorphs books, and you know, just serialize young people's fiction. Then manga became a real thing, and as I, you know, gave the whole anime thing, like, so I got really into that, and I started to realize I liked being in worlds that were tailored specifically to suit the purposes of a creator, even though I would never think of it in those terms. But I didn't know that I had no appreciation of like genre distinction. I just liked what was cool to me. But yeah, so I was reading pretty much anything that, like, we almost had this unofficial book club. So, but we were doing it the series thing. So sci-fi, fantasy series, whatever it was. Obviously Harry Potter kind of being the king of the crown of that sort of space. But then it would be just tons of stuff. And then we would randomly get our hands on some like what I now know is literary fiction, but I had no appreciation of that back then. And so it kind of went that way. But I didn't know any of any authors. I didn't really have the confidence to even say out loud I want to be a writer until I was in college. And that's where I met one of my first mentors, and she started giving me like actually making me like someone who read with intention, tailoring me into a close reader.
I promise to drop this line of inquiry in the near future, but I'm really intrigued by this. I'm interested by your pivot into literary fiction, because like you, my parents dropped me off at the library and picked me up. It's so funny. I was just talking with someone else about that, so it's interesting to hear you say the same. I guess there's a kind of pamphlet that all African parents consult, and they kind of
right.
the same way.
Free babysitting, you know what I'm saying?
true. But I'm so interested by your turn into literary fiction, because it sounds to me like you have the perfect kind of, I guess, background for genre, for sci-fi, for fantasy, and yet you pivot into literary fiction. So what piece of literary fiction convinced you that this is something that you wanted to do? I imagine that George Saunders had something to do with it, because I definitely see a lot of his influence in your work. But I'm wondering if there's anyone else who kind of motivated that decision.
Well, like George is like the huge like totemic example, and also because like his name and example legitimizes a certain kind of space. But
yeah,
I have his book right here, like literally like on hands. I did an event with him earlier, which was like a huge kind of dream come true for me. He's one of my great mentors. He ended up becoming one of my great mentors, and I read his stuff in my college professor's space. But I'm sure that what really like the real answer is that I went to university. I went to SUNY Albany, and what was given to me ended up being mostly quote unquote literary writing, and it shaped my appreciation of voice. But for me, the real answer is I still haven't chosen any genre or literary or not. I know that some writers are regarded a certain way in certain spaces. I also got an MFA. And again, like as much as I might want to resist this or that, I know that there's this weird tiering system that happens, and it might have tailored me towards what we consider literary. But I don't, like in myself, I never was like, yo, I'm a sci-fi writer, or I'm a literary writer, or I'm this or that. I think the distinction is mostly like, I think there's cool necessity in it. But for me, it feels like selling point as opposed to like craft. And I mean that, and I say that as someone who works, I could give a talk about how to write surreal stories, but I like don't reject any of the labels. I almost accept them all. So I don't think I ever chose literary fiction. I think I was like, I want to be the best writer I can be, and I'm competitive as well. Used to be like problematically, and so like I'll see the people around me, and I'm like, that work made me really feel something. That work was powerful. That work was important. I want to be able to do that. And obviously, like people like Toni Morrison, like who I can sort of look at as like the ideal writer. I want to do that, and Alice Walker, I can do that, and James Baldwin, I want to do that, and George, I want to do that. So it ends up being literary writer. So that's who I end up telling myself after. But there's people who create in so many genres that I'm like, that's what I'm interested in. That makes me feel something. And so I resist. For me, it's like I always ended up resisting any real box, and I even resist even as I go into like, I'm interested, like right underneath my laptop, there's like a keyboard and a beat machine, and I have cameras over here. Like, even Medium might be like a limiter as well. So I'm into all of it, basically, is what I'm saying. So that's a long answer.
No, it's a great answer. And I'm glad that you resist, I guess, this kind of external pressure to label your own work. Because the thing that I find as a Black writer, if we're going to sort of use those terms, that that there is a kind of temptation, it seems, for critics and others to kind of instantly label the work so they can compartmentalize it in a way. So they can say, okay, that's that. And there are other writers who are able to have, the run of the show. They're able to do all kinds of things, and it's acceptable. So I respect the fact that
Saunders is a perfect example.
Sorry,
George. I said George Saunders is a good example of that.
Yeah, I agree. I absolutely agree. And I think, and his career is interesting because he starts publishing in his late 30s, early 40s, and before then has an entirely other career. And then he's instantly published in the New Yorker. Something I wonder is if that route is available. And I love George Saunders. I have to say that's a caveat. And I read his work obsessively when I started engaging with literary fiction. But I wonder if that kind of lane would be open to somebody who wasn't George Saunders. And I think he's aware of this as well. I think he speaks in really sensitive terms about the pathways that are available to someone like him that perhaps aren't available to other people.
Yeah, for sure. He's like, he's a white male, for sure. Yeah.
So I just want to pivot a little bit to talk about craft, to ask a couple questions. As a writer, I find that I have certain like writerly quirks and bad traits that like seem to appear in every draft that I write. You know, it's like a word that I use too often, or like a move that I make way too often. And I'm wondering if you have any of those, and if you'd be willing to divulge those things to people who might aspire to write, so they, recognize that you are still a human being, right?
Oh yeah, and I appreciate that question, because that's really key, and it's hard for me to give an answer because my first draft, second draft, third drafts are one big bad habit of terribleness. I man, I want to give like something sort of specific. I can there's like, it's different level because there's like line level stuff and there's like concept level stuff. I think that I try to be good about not falling too in love with any particular conceit. And so I might have I might over want to swerve a story. So like I might just like rip it off the rail sometimes, because I'm trying to do the thing of keeping it engaging, surprising to myself. So that's some, like, I guess, high level thing. But then on a line level, I'm thinking about this because I'm revising a novel, and I'm seeing on a sentence level, like I'll use like a like, I don't know, introductory clause, like weird introductory clause, like so, to start sentences a lot. And I was just like deleting so many of them the other day. It was making me sick. So that's like very specific, but to me that was annoying. I mean, this is something I had no idea of. If you ask my copy editor, I bet they'll tell you a lot more. Like, sometimes there's, you know what I mean? Like there's stuff where it's like you almost can't see it. I almost can't see them all because I'm not. I could tell you more probably in like a month.
Yeah. Fair enough. No, I appreciate that answer, and it's something that, me too, and it's so deeply annoying to kind of see those things. I want to ask a question about language because I love language, and that's the reason why some people come to writing for plot or for character. I came to writing because of language, and I really appreciate the language in your book. And I wanted to pull a couple of examples from your first story. So in the first story, you describe police lights tie-dyeing the air, which I think is a beautiful image. A yellow dress puddles around a young woman when she falls, and then it becomes a sun that her partner rides in. Why this is a kind of deep attention to language that I find really edifying and interesting. Did you ever write poetry, or do you just have you always cared about image in that way? Where does that come from?
I really appreciate this question as well. Because I think and I wonder if how you feel about this, like your like analysis of, like, I don't know, literary world or whatever. I feel that, and I mean, this doesn't matter, I'm not like salty, but I feel like if you write with certain types of surreal or sci-fi conceits, that the conversation about your work, like, that becomes the sun around which the conversation orbits. And it's almost like people don't get to the language because they're like interested in like, what even is this? And so, yeah, that's a thing. So I wonder how, after I answer, I guess I'm wondering how you feel about that. But I'm super interested in poetry. I'm a huge fan of rap, for like, which made my way into poetry. But I took poetry class in MFA class in my MFA when I was in grad school. I really like when someone could do like impressive things with language, and like for me, like rap is where I feel at the like most presently in my life usually. But I care, I like to make a image explode in someone's brain if I can, and I feel like like, you ever feel like you get stepped on for something? I feel like that's the part that I feel like I try, because to me that is like, this form is a linear. It's a linear medium. It's a word and a word and a word. So if someone's really entrenched in it, it's the language that's like the way in, line level stuff. But I think that almost gets disregarded because like the idea of the summation of those lines made people forget about how they felt getting to that point. And so, I mean, I do like poetry. I like line level appreciation. I think of myself as someone who tries to put with the most effort possible on the line level. And like you said, I like I don't know, like dynamic sort of exploding images, and I like to pick my spots with them as well. I try not to overdo it. So like that puddle image, and that she was sitting in the sun, the middle of the sun with Tisha, like to me, that's an image I thought of, and like I felt like having a bright sun in the middle of that dark, sort of harsh scene was necessary. And that I tried to really put myself into like, how do I feel when cop cars are around and tie-dyes the world, sort of. So I try to do that. But yeah, I appreciate it, because I feel like it gets stepped on if you write work that isn't more, I guess, human scales, what George says, or like real. If you don't write realism, I feel like people jump to the conceits. But if you write realism, because the world's so comfortable for people are more willing to engage with the work on a line level, language level. Does that make sense?
It makes sense perfectly, and I completely get what you're saying. Because I do think that I think that for a lot of writers of color, there isn't. I read so many reviews all the time, and because I care deeply about this, and I write criticism as well. And you don't see a lot of, when you see criticism about work that's by people of color, it's often focused on the topical stuff and not so much on craft, right? So you can read in the New Yorker some great review about, like, the difference between a review about like Sally Rooney or something, and it goes deep into craft and what she's doing and why it's interesting, as opposed to some, writer of color where it's focused on the topic they're writing about and why it's important. And hey, these people
the fact that they're
this work
pretty much.
yeah. So it's really it's troubling, and I care about language, and I think there's a paper written too about those of us who are deeply inspired by hip hop and how that has kind of translated into our work. People ask me all the time about poetry, and I'd say that I love poetry and I read lots of poetry, but I was afraid of poetry in the beginning. And, I came to poetry via rap as well. For me, it was Saul Williams initially. I loved his work. He's a slam poet who also does hip hop. And then I started, Lupe Fiasco was really important to me at one point in my life. And I was just, just kind of, I think, one of the great literary artists of his generation.
Different.
And so,
crazy.
Yeah, his work was important to me, and so yeah, somebody needs to write that paper. I would, but I'm super busy at the moment. But you've inspired me. I want to ask one more question before we pivot to audience questions. And you mentioned, I was reading a bit about you, and you said that there was a professor who asked you. One of the reasons you started writing is that a professor asked you that if you had to write a story to save the world, what would you write about? That was a question he posed. And so I'm wondering if I could pose that question to you now. Like, if you had to write a story to save the world, what kind of story would you write today?
It's the professor that asked me that was Arthur Flowers. I don't know if you know Arthur Flowers. You know Arthur? He's a Black professor in Syracuse.
Yeah. I know of him, but I've not had the pleasure of meeting him.
Super solid, like Black hoodoo, like the real deal Memphis blues man. Really, like, that type of dude. And he's like very epic, like, he has like that bluesy kind of voice. And if you could write a story to save the world, that kind of thing. But the answer for me, then I'm happy like that I can say this, I think, honestly, the answer for me is the novel that I'm working on right now. It has a lot to do with, I mean, again, and this is like, it's hard because I have to speak of it in like sort of exposition terms, but it's about the carceral system and prison and our ideas of criminality, I guess, in a very sci-fi, futuristic, my kind of thing world. But yeah, I would write that story. The novel, my novel would be my answer. So
yeah, good answer. Well, I can't wait to read it. And let's, so there are a lot of great questions, and I'll start to read them. Before I start, I'd like to note that if anybody wants to write a question, you can type those questions or comments in the chat bubble in the upper right, and I'll read them as they come in if they make sense for this forum and this conversation. So I'd like to ask you, PJ asks, how do you balance making demands on the reader with taking care of the reader, which I think is an excellent question.
That's such a good question. I try to, for me, like, I think, and it's interesting because there's so many ways of taking care can mean so many things, and I think about it a lot. But talking about if there is a distinction between literary and other stuff, which I don't really subscribe to, but what I imagine might be the case is literary work tries to assume the reader is like their best, smartest self. It's not. It's very much like trying to like look up to the reader or be like, meet me right here. And so I try to assume the best of them, assume they're just as smart as I am, assume that they have just as much capacity for all, good, bad that I have, and assume that they are, I hope that they have some generosity with me to be like, listen, like, there's a lot going on right here, but in 3-4 pages, especially in the short story collection, you're going to feel like you understand how to drive a ship it was totally alien to you at first. But in like 3 pages, if you give me some generosity, you're going to know how to drive it perfectly. Imagine literally like stepping into like an alien ship and like, what the hell? And then like this mind meld happens and now you're like, oh, you can do it. And because that's the feeling I get from Georgia stories. I was like, what the hell is this in the beginning? But I want to keep reading it though. And then I like that feeling because it's like say it's not going to do the thing. The example I give is like, in a video game, I'm also into video games, and I think of them as a very like serious storytelling medium as well. Like, there's some games where in the beginning would be like press A to jump, right? Or there's games where like they'll put an obstacle in front of you and they'll be like, we think you could figure out how to press A to get over it. We're not going to say anything. We're going to give you a gameplay to like figure out the space. It will be a tutorial, but it's an invisible tutorial. I like that because it makes me feel respected as a reader of that work. So I try to just assume that they're, generous, but also very smart and capable, and like handle them with love. And there's also the other side of it about like what violence I expose them to, and like how do I make sure that it's never gratuitous or pornographic, but also always for something. And that's something I'm really interested in as well.
Yeah,
that's a great question.
Great answer. Yeah, that's a really good question. So Joe Jones asks, how do you think about your why today versus your pre-Trayvon Martin why? I suppose he's asking if and how your kind of motivation for writing has shifted over that time period.
I've grown as a human being. Pre-Trayvon Martin, my like why for like Trayvon Martin helped me understand like my purpose generally a little more. And it's not just always, it's that I could see that it opened my eyes to like, Trayvon Martin comes at the intersection of so many issues as sort of American racism does. So the undeniableness of Trayvon's murder and the subsequent acquittal made me like be like, huh. I was 21, but like I had already know like, okay, there's things that are bad, but it made me, it opened my eyes to a sort of systemic harshness that we were kind of grown to accept. And I guess it was one of the times where I was sort of had enough consciousness to be aware of it or see it clearly, and also feel like I had enough personal agency to say something about it, or I thought I did. Now, once your eyes are open, you can't go back to blindness. And so you see how that there's so many versions of that in so many different ways. I also understand, so like that's a Trayvon Martin. He looked a lot like me, and I could have been that person. So that's how I was open. But then I started to see, oh wait, like if that's happened to that, what kind of violences and injustice are women, and then if it's particular Black women being subject to, and then it's like, oh wait, then like, oh, there's a whole queer community that's being treated unfairly and like consistently and systemically. Then there's like maybe even in particular our trans community, like how are they being treated, and you start seeing like, oh wow, like there's a whole host of injustice that is like inherent to our current systems, and it's like killing all of us kind of. And he kind of made me see it more clearly, which is I think a thing you feel and know already, but he made me like see and begin to start articulating it. And you know, so that's why it was such a touch point. So it's not like it, I think pre him I knew that stuff was like bad, but post that happening I was sort of in a space of I started to acquire the tools necessary to see like how certain disenfranchisement was happening, and also that we're all being hurt by those systems.
Sure. Let's see. So Kofi Adisa asks, can you touch on your publishing journey for us?
Yeah, I can. I'll try to get the quick version. So like I wrote a lot of like, I liked writing in the beginning because it was like something you couldn't take away from me. Like I had my dad's like little legal pads, and you know, even if the TV gets cut off, I could write. And so I would do that when I was younger. But again, I didn't really think I could be a real writer until I went to college, and stuff was really getting like sort of rougher back home. And I went to, actually Lydia Davis was there, and I went to her office like, I want to be a writer, and she was nice to me. And she ended up referring me to who became my first real mentor, Lynn Tillman. And then Lynn Tillman really like gave me like stories to read. And she basically like a 2-year independent study with her. And and she and I took workshops with her, and she was my first like person to like really obliterate my manuscripts, like really like really like, you know, and which was good for me.
She's
I learned
fantastic.
to like view.
I love her. She's
Lynn
so
Tillman?
wonderful. Yeah, I love her work. Yeah,
she's amazing.
Absolutely. Yeah, she's
and
dope.
She's a really
Definitely.
dope, kind person. Yeah, she's really kind, and like, you know, and it was different for me because again, like, you know, it's like she's just a very nice lady, you know, and she give you like tea and whatnot, and she took interest in me, you know, and I through her, she's the first person who gave me. She would go to her little cabinet and get like PDF this boom, Grace Paley. She was using Grace Paley, boom, Ben Baldwin, boom, George Saunders, and so like, and I would come back. I later on realized I was supposed to come back like at the end of the semester with those 3 stories, like annotating stuff. I came back next week. Like years later, I found out I thought I was gonna come back like months later. I came back next week. Okay, next, give me more. And I was doing that like every week. Yeah, I found that out like literally like last 2 years ago. She told one of my other professors she thought I was gonna come back like way later on. But at that period, I found out what an MFA was because I searched George Saunders' name actually, and I applied like 2 months before. This is like, I'm giving the long version of the story, even though I said I was going to keep it short. And then I did the MFA thing. I'll skip over, you know, existential crises, you know, obligatory art school, sadness, you're stressed out, life is crazy. Boom. I went to Colgate on a fellowship, Colgate University. And there I was still working my thing, my book. I had a manuscript I was trying to get published. Trying to get an agent for. And what actually, for me, this is connected to it all. My father was diagnosed with diffuse large cell lymphoma. And I remember telling my little sister, like, okay, like I'm gonna get an agent and I'm gonna send my book in like 3 months. Thinking it's gonna like help everything or whatever. And that happened. I sold the book I got an agent, and Meredith Kafel Simonoff, she worked with me. We sold the book. Like let's say that I said that in like November. I got the call from my book deal on my birthday, March 7th of that year. And so yeah, I don't know. I don't know how to explain, but like a lot of like kind of magical, to me, like crazy, like lucky / divine stuff happened. But Yeah, that was sort of the publishing story for me. It's hard to tell. The real story of it's me sitting in a room in Syracuse for hours and hours and hours and hours, trying and failing and trying and failing. And there's 12 stories in my book, but I have probably 80 stories that no one will ever see in Google Drive. And it's a lot of failure. And I had like in my submittable page, I have like these 2 years of straight rejections. So it's more, that's the real story. But that's the other thing I said is like the timeline.
Yeah, that makes sense. One of the more popular questions here is one that's related to a question asked you earlier, and it's by Nana Owusu. How did you feel about the George Floyd, Breonna Taylor incidents 2 years after Friday Black?
We have some Ghanaians here today. What's going on? I was, whoever it is, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, Philando Castile, Sandra Bland, Tony McDade. I was devastated. I was heartbroken. A weird thing has happened with it though, because of my book, Finkelstein 5, and because of what I just said, you kind of become this like Black Death correspondent is like the term I say. And so the book came out in Germany, and like I get a call from Germany about trying to explain like the Black Lives Matter movement happening here, and George Floyd and whoever they might want to speak about at the time. I feel just like everybody else feels, or how I think you should feel, is heartbroken, devastated. And I haven't watched after Philando Castile. Actually, I said I would never watch one of those videos because I had like a huge anxiety, like sort of spiral. And I was like, I don't watch the videos. I know the news of it, but I haven't watched those videos, and I probably won't ever again. But I felt hurt. But also, there's a part of me eventually that gets to like reignited conviction, I guess. But mostly I just felt hurt.
Amen to that. Roger Chang asks, Friday Black was a great story. How many times did you rewrite your original draft?
Oh, the story, Friday Black? A zillion.
Yes. Yeah. He said the story, not the book, so I guess he's talking about the story.
Yeah. Tons. I'm a big rewriter, big reviser. It's hard to like really say a number, and sometimes I feel like writers like to gas the numbers to like say some crazy thing, but like for me, it's like definitely hundreds for real, But it means I just read it through and I changed this and I changed that, and that's all before I even got an editor. Then you get an editor and you change it again. And that story actually in particular, I had it for over 2 years before I added to me the key moment in which, if you can believe it, the Ice King character says something in the language of the Friday Black language to the other characters. So like he's also kind of infected with it. I didn't have that moment until like late. So basically a lot is my answer.
Sure. Damon Cooper asks, how would you engage youth who believe reading and writing aren't important in today's society?
It's important. It's a good question. It's something I do. If you teach, you do it. I have like a dual layered approach. Like sometimes I try to remember they've come up in a academic space / canon that often doesn't reflect them or their interests or their identities, and sometimes they're forced to read stuff by people who literally don't even consider them human beings in the same right they would consider themselves. So that's me like implicating the canon or whatever, and also not understanding that we're competing with a lot of media and whatever. So my main thing is to like try to give them stuff that is fun and that I think they'll like rock with on a personal level. So that's number one. I'll try to remind them that writing is the basis through which all the stuff they really like comes to be. Like I do some screenwriting stuff, so like, you know, that's writing as well. And all the screenwriters they like probably like most, they come from they write. You know, they read. I try to show them, like, you know, I actually use the manga anime angle. That's reading. You know, that's a deep appreciation of storytelling. And so for me, all those things are ways, but the best way is to get them to read something and then have in class like close reading stuff and just try. Oh, you don't like this? Try this. Try this. But me, I'm tailoring it to that individual if I can. Excuse me. And also like you know, trying to get stuff that and also like I love the short form because I can give them little stuff that just blows their head up and makes them feel like, oh wow, this is interesting. You know, I can give them The School by Bartholomew, and some kids are gonna be like, what the hell is that? But they're gonna be interested. I can give them Sonny's Blues, and they'll be like, this made me feel a certain type of music that I hadn't felt before. I can give them Isabel by George Saunders. It's small, it's weird, it's different. I can, you know, I could play with like what I could give them even like The Colonel, Carolyn Forche, and poetry. Poetry does a good job. A lot of kids like are willing to engage with poetry if you set it up for them right. So, you know, you gotta, for me, it's like being aware of their interests, trying to meet them where they're at, listening to them, and then hoping that something hits.
Yeah. It's a great response. There's so many more questions, but I fear that we're running out of time, so perhaps we'll stop now. I just want to say thank you to everybody at Howard Community College for setting this up, for folks on the tech side, folks who help with the content. Everything that all of you did is deeply appreciated. And of course, to our guest of honor, Nana, you've offered some incredible responses to questions that I posed and also those posed by those who are watching this. And thank you, perhaps most importantly, for the work you've offered, and we're looking forward to your future novel as well. So thank you so much for this conversation.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Those were spectacular questions from the audience and from you. I guess I didn't realize this was the inaugural version of this. So shout out to the college. This is a beautiful opportunity. So thank you guys.
Great. So I think that's it. Thank all of you for watching this, and I hope that you're inspired to go read and perhaps even write as well. Thank you.